Well, Brant, here it is. It's time for the NFL playoffs, which means it's time to get a early jump on the fantasy football season next year. Yes, I know for a lot of teams, a lot of fan bases out there, they've still got meaningful football to watch. But for me and you, we're done with meaningful football. We've got some exciting stuff to talk about for the offseason with our teams. But for all extents and purposes, it's the offseason for Dynasty, for fantasy football. It's time to start getting that research in, Brant.
Absolutely. It's playoff time in the NFL. The NFC looks to be shaken out to be really fun to watch. I still think San Fran and Ravens end up meeting in the end. Yes, I'm putting my guess out right now. But yeah, it's off season. It's one of my favorite times for fantasy football. We get to dive into these rookies. College season is over. Please, Michael Penix, do not put a Seahawks jersey on. I don't care what the rest of our fan base says. I hope you succeed, just not in a Seahawks jersey. But I mean, it's that time. It's one of my favorite times of the football season is to dive into these rookies and some buys and sells. So yeah, let's get into it.
Yeah, it's time to put the bibs on, Brant.
Let's eat.
So, Brant, like we alluded to before the intro, it's time to get into the offseason. It's time to get into doing some research and getting yourself ahead of time. And for you and I, it really starts with diving into the rookies. It starts looking at the impending free agent class, guys that we're interested in, guys we want to move away from. But before that happens, the first domino of the NFL offseason takes place on a day called Black Monday in the NFL. It started at 12:02 a.m. Eastern time this past Monday with my Atlanta Falcons firing Arthur Smith. The entire fantasy community let out a sigh of relief with the freeing of Kyle Pitts, Drake London, and Bijan Robinson. So that was the first domino to fall on Black Monday. Of course, we also had Josh McDaniel and Brandon Staley fired during the season in the NFL. Since we've seen Mike Vrabel, Ron Rivera, and then your Pete Carroll of your Seattle Seahawks today happening. So, really there's a lot of landscape's going to change in the NFL as a whole, but also for the fantasy. So, Brand, if you want to talk about what, your stance is on the coaching carousel and what that really means for fantasy in your mind.
Yeah, I'll get into the Mike Vrabel and the Tennessee Titans here in just a minute on how I feel about that whenever we get into my first buy. It actually is going to come out of that offense. As for Seattle, I think it's a year a little later. I'm cheering for Pete. As always, he's done great with Seattle. I'm happy to see him. He left on his own terms. He is still going to be an advisory role, hopefully maybe a little QB coach. He's done some magic with some quarterbacks. I'm excited. This is like you and me alluded to today. This is my first time having to go through this carousel in a long, long time. I'm excited to see what it brings, but in my mind, when it comes to Seattle, it may bring a new beginning. Got to wait and see what coach is hired there in Seattle, or if they hire within in Seattle. You could be bringing a new beginning with the Raiders. That's going to be interesting, man. We saw that interim coach start to put some fire underneath their butts, and that team's starting to look good. You and me both have talked, and we both think that Adams is probably halfway out the door already. So that could change a whole lot there. And then I'll let you talk about your Falcons. I'm excited to see what your Falcons can bring with all those pieces on offense.
Yeah, so first and foremost, there's also a lot of rumors about Bill Belichick which, my goodness, I'm not sure. And there's a lot of ties to him in Atlanta. I mentioned there too, but I'm not sure there's a more tedious way to put everybody in the fantasy community on full tilt. But Arthur Smith ruining the value of Drake London, Bijan Robinson, Kyle Pitts. Everybody gets excited about celebrating the freedom of those three players, to Bill Belichick coming in who you can't trust in the fantasy football world. So we'll see how that plays out. But Michigan Wolverines won a national championship on Monday. Sounds like Jim Harbaugh may be back interested to come into the NFL. I think he goes to the Chargers. If he comes back, he's going to want to win right off the jump. I think the Chargers do give him the most instant impact at that. Maybe your Seahawks as well, depending on what they want to do with the quarterback situation. But I do think Jim Harbaugh comes into the NFL. That makes the Chargers a little bit more appealing. I think, obviously the Raiders are going to get more appealing because obviously they don't like what they have in Jimmy G. Aiden O'Connell isn't it. Obviously, he was a fine stopgap. I guess he kept them interested or into a few games, but I think they addressed the quarterback situation. And we'll talk about the NFL free agent carousel at some point too, with the quarterbacks that are out there and things. So it'll definitely be interesting to see how it plays out. And as far as my Atlanta Falcons, Brant, my goodness, I can't own enough of them right now at this point. It's like, me and our mutual buddy at work, who's also a Falcons fan, have made several jokes that we can't wait until Kyle Pitts gets his second contract. He's playing for the Kansas City Chiefs for him to have some value. We may not have to see that happen at this point because, Arthur Smith is finally gone. Maybe we get a coach in that starts to utilize and draw plays for the best players on the team, rather than saying, hey, I'm such an arrogant, pompous FedEx, future CEO that I'm going to go use Jonnu Smith, Cordero Patterson, and Mac Hollins just to prove to everybody how good of a coach I am. I'm going to scheme those players, So I think the fantasy community wins with the firing of Arthur Smith. I know as a Falcons fan, I feel like we've won. I'll see how I feel moving forward. If they trade a first-round draft pick for Bill Belichick, I won't feel the same way. But there's some really good prime coaching candidates out there. Ben Johnson of the Detroit Lions, Brant, he goes someplace that offense is going to be instantly fantasy relevant. Joe Brady of formerly of the Carolina Panthers, currently with the Buffalo Bills as their offensive coordinator. Same thing. Definitely will be fantasy relevancy there. And then, you got the defensive guys, Dan Quinn, who I still think is going to, end up there potentially with your Seattle Seahawks, who I obviously have expected well. I love Dan. The one thing I had a problem with Dan Quinn was he's too much of a players guy. His players absolutely love him, but he doesn't make people practice. He doesn't make people play in the preseason, and so that can sometimes make problems early in the fantasy season as well. But yeah, it's definitely going to be an interesting one. And of course, as we have updates, on our weekly shows, Brant, we'll talk about when these teams hire coaches, how that directly impacts the fantasy relevant players on that team.
Yeah, absolutely. I would absolutely love to see Dan Quinn come up to Seattle. Harbaugh, if he comes, please bring JJ with you. I wouldn't mind him coming in and playing for Seattle. This offseason is going to be a fun and bumpy one to sit and watch with all the free agents. We talked about some last week on our show. And there's going to be a lot of free agents talks. There's going to be a lot of coaches talks. The combine's coming up. The playoffs are here. It's time to really pay attention and start diving into your offseason. This is how you get ahead of your competition in Dynasty. And the coaches, like people that do fantasy go, the coaches don't matter. Coaches don't matter. They really do, because then you have to look at the new scheme. Like you went from, I'm going to use Pete Carroll. You went from Pete Carroll, who was, I want to ground and pound and play tough defense, to you could possibly see them get an air raid coach that wants to throw the ball a lot more and bring in a quarterback with a better deep ball. So, I mean, the coach could change a whole lot of things when it comes to fantasy.
Absolutely, it could, Brant. And again, the Dynasty community is so unique in the fact that it's an ever-revolving door. Part of what makes us and the Dynasty community so unique is that we are constantly paying attention to coaching changes, roster changes, because we don't have an offseason in Dynasty, right? In active Dynasty leagues, there's going to be trades made as soon as you take your league and move it to the next year. So it's definitely one of those things where you got to be constantly evolving, constantly doing your research, looking at things, because here I am, if I'm paying attention and I see this coach come in and I'm like, wait a minute, I don't think I like his fit. I don't think he's going to use this player the same way as he did last year. And maybe I want to try to sell high on him. If you're not paying attention to what that new coach brings to the table, you may overpay for a player that sees their value decrease, which again, I'm sure we'll talk about as the offseason progresses. But today, Brant, we're here for a specific reason, right? We're starting a 2-week series here. We're going to do some dynasty buys this week that'll lead us into some dynasty sells next week. Because honestly, this is the time of the year where you want to start buying some of these guys on the cheap, on the low, try to get them a little bit cheaper than what you're going to as training camp starts ticking up and things of that nature and around draft season, because right now is the time to move draft picks. All those things are here now. So let's get into these dynasty buys this week, Brant, and just really bring some noise to the folks here. So who's your first dynasty buy? Somebody you just have to have this offseason.
One of my favorite ones is actually a guy that I was hoping Seattle was going to snag later in the draft, but then we took Zach Charbonnet, and that's Tajay Spears of the Tennessee Titans. We saw Derrick Henry's speech leaving, pretty much saying, hey, I'm out of Tennessee. Thank you, guys. Very good speech, to say goodbye to the fans. And then you saw the firing of Mike Vrabel. So they're going to bring in a new coach. But let's talk about some running backs that really blew up this year, and that was James Cook and Rachaad White. Great skill set where they catch the ball in the backfield and they can run between the tackles. Tajay Spears out of Tulane, who's in his second year in Tennessee this upcoming year, who gets a new coach. He is very explosive. He has great hands. He can break it. He can get to the second level real quick. This is a guy, he finished as the RB 34 in PPR leagues. He had 100 rushing attempts, 70 targets, and he caught 52 of those targets. And like I said, he finished as an RB 34 as a backup there in Tennessee. 22 years old. You could probably go out and get him for a late second, early third round draft pick. A whole lot of people aren't thinking about him because Derrick's still in town. The minute that Derrick Henry actually leaves town, this man's value goes even higher. Now, with him, he does have a history of some knee problems. So this could be a 1-year rental to where you're like, all right, I think next year he's going to blow up. And then maybe I'm shipping him. So you pay attention, because this is a name that I may have on a buy for this offseason, but he may be on my sales list next season. But one guy I absolutely love next year, and I think it's Tajay Spears. I think he takes that Rachaad White, James Cook jump next year there in Tennessee.
So I'm curious, Brant, just because, so it is a buy, and right now maybe a better time to buy. You may get him a little cheaper because somebody may be like me who, I'm not saying I'm necessarily worried about this, but what's your thoughts on it? Is it Tennessee still going to be a run first, ground and pound it type of team next year without Vrabel? Because that was very much Vrabel's philosophy as well. Are you nervous at all that you may get a coach in there who, wants to be more of a aired out type of an offense?
No, because I think that actually favors Tajay Spears. Like I said, he can catch the ball very well. D-Hop, I'd have to go back and check his contract. Treylon Burks, they don't really have an outstanding wide receiver weapon right now. Not saying they couldn't add one in the offseason or via the draft. But I think that actually would help Tajay Spears. A, it would open up some run lanes if they start passing the ball a little more. And B, like I said, he's a great open field pass catcher. We saw him break some good 15, 20-yard catches this year. And he was barely used this year in the rushing game. I mean, 152 times he touched the ball this year. And one of the biggest things was he finished as an RB 34. He only had 3 touchdowns in that time.
Yeah. Touchdown. He should have a positive touchdown. I hate, again, we're going to get into this debate. I hate regression because it's a pugression. But yeah, he's going to have a positive touchdown regression next year as long as he's the starting running back in Tennessee, regardless of who the coach is, because he's going to get more than 3. It's just going to happen that way, Brad.
Oh, absolutely.
And as long as Derrick Henry goes, if you buy right now why Derrick Henry is still a free agent, still potentially going to Tennessee, you're going to get Tajay Spears cheap. He could be an instant flip this year, Brant. If you were able to get him cheap right now, and the Derrick Henry leaves town, you could be dangling him in front of people for first-round draft picks at the draft. If somebody's like, oh, I need a running back, and there's none on the board. Yeah, now you trade up and you get you a Romeo Oduzia, or Malik Neighbors or Keon Coleman. You go out there and you get one of these stud incoming wide receivers because, man, maybe your league mate needs a running back. So I like Tajay Spears. I'm just curious to see if you were worried at all about with Vrabel being gone. So I'm glad to hear you're not. So I'm going to talk about my running back first. Because I have two more players that I'm slightly more excited about than my running back here. So Kendre Miller is one that I want to talk about here, Brant, for the New Orleans Saints out of TCU. This was one that a lot of people were excited about coming into this season due to Alvin Kamara's suspension, and there was a lot to be desired. Jamal Williams left a lot to be desired too. But I think Jamal Williams probably ends up off the roster after this season. And the other thing that's really interesting is Alvin Kamara is cuttable. This is the first year after Alvin Kamara's his contract that he is cuttable. Now it's a dead cap money of $10 million. So that's a lot for the running back position. However, I don't know, Brant, if you've looked into this at all yet. This New Orleans Saints organization is in the worst cap hell that we have ever seen in the NFL. They're going to have to get fancy with how they trim money off of these books. And I think a big way they could do that is Alvin Kamara, because yes, it's a $10 million dead cap hit, but on March 24th, I believe it is, he gets a $1.5 million roster bonus. And he's still on, I think he's on salary for like $12.8 million. So there's some money to be saved there for this year as well as the future if they were able to move off of him. Now I can see you want to say something, so I'm going to let you do that before I get into more of Kendre Miller. So
this is just the second year they've been in cap hell where they've had to make a lot of moves. And really Kamara and Michael Thomas or even Carr make the most sense in saving money. So I absolutely love this Kendre Miller.
Yeah. And if you remember right last year, Brant, they were starting to get in that salary cap hell. They tried to run it back one more year with this Derek Carr thing. You saw a lot of their defensive free agents and offensive free agents go elsewhere because they just couldn't afford to match offers. So it'll be interesting to see. So back to this Kendre Miller thing. He did play the Atlanta Falcons this week, so I did get a front row seat to this, watching it, here in my living room. But Kendre Miller looked every ounce of what we all thought he could be this last Sunday against my Atlanta Falcons. 13 carries, 73 yards, and a touchdown to go along with it. He also caught one pass for 6 yards in a game that the New Orleans Saints just dominated. And 13 carries doesn't sound like a lot, but Brant, every time I looked up, this man was making a big play, making guys miss, breaking tackles on a defense with the Atlanta Falcons that had been pretty sound against the run to that point. This is one of the better running back performances the Atlanta Falcons gave up this year. So, again, I'm not saying Kendre Miller is a guy that I'm going to sell the farm for, Brant. I'm not going out and giving up a first-round pick for this guy at all. But, again, if you're if somebody owns Kendre Miller in your league that, maybe just left him on their taxi all year, never took him off. And here it is at draft season. They got to get rid of him anyway. Maybe you offer him, a third-round rookie draft pick to get, hey, I'll take him off your roster. That way you can, you don't have to drop him, whatever. You sweet talk somebody into that. He only had one relevant game. But this guy could be very much the same way Tajay Spears could be a huge RB1 upside next year, Brant.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And we know how the Saints are. Taysom Hill, I'm not sure what his cap hit is, but that man might be off the roster, which frees up Lord knows what that all frees up with whatever else Taysom Hill does. So absolutely, I love Kendre Miller. You're probably getting him in for maybe a mid-second, maybe a late second there, I would assume, because it is a name that a lot of people were excited for. But like you said, a lot of people may have forgotten about him. It all depends. Before I jump into my next guy, do you have any more running backs? Because there is one thing I wanted to throw out. So when it comes to running backs, you may have a disgruntled owner in your Dynasty League. Go see if that disgruntled owner of Bijan Robinson has any interest of maybe shipping him for a first-round draft pick, just because he was very disappointing, to say the least, this year. But I still think him and Breece Hall are your 1 and 2 in fantasy startups. So if he happens to be a little disgruntled, just see if you can sweet talk your way into grabbing Bijan, because there's not a running back in this class with as much talent as Bijan Robinson. I just want to put that out there and see what maybe you guys can poke around. I, unfortunately, cannot poke around to that because I'm pretty sure Bijan is owned by Falcons fans in all my Dynasty leagues.
He's not. He's owned in a Bears league in our home league. I do want to say, so I think Bijan was slightly frustrating this year because of the touchdown or lack of touchdowns,
Mhm.
he was RB9 on the season. So
Yep.
he wasn't
Yep.
that disappointing. 500 yards receiving, almost 1,000 yards rushing. So he had a pretty darn good season. It just, there wasn't the touchdowns there that you expected. You thought you'd see double digits out of him. So I still think it's going to cost you a hefty first round draft pick and then some probably to go get him. But he shouldn't be available, and he probably will be going into this offseason because of what he did last year. Jahmyr Gibbs, for all intents and purposes, more people are interested in Gibbs moving forward than they are Bijan, and that shouldn't be the case. So I agree.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. So let me jump into my second guy. My second guy is a quarterback that played 13 games. He finished his QB 17, even only playing 13 games. That's Justin Herbert. I know, getting a new head coach, but he's going to be in the second year with Kellen Moore, most likely. Most likely, I don't see whatever new head coach comes in getting rid of Kellen Moore. That offense was explosive. Kellen Moore's offense was explosive in Dallas, looked great, and it had tendencies this year to look really good. He's got Michael Williams there. He's got Josh Palmer. He's got Quentin Johnson. He still has Keenan Allen as of right now. You and me talked about that Keenan Allen could end up being a cut. But this is a guy that has finished as QB1 in 3 years prior to this year. He's finished as a top 12 quarterback. He had 20 touchdowns, 3,100 yards, and finished as QB 17 this year. I just think he gets more used to this offense. It gets a little better for him, and I absolutely like Justin Herbert moving forward. In one QB leagues, you're probably shipping a third or fourth round pick to go get him because it's only one QB. In Superflex, you're probably having to go maybe late first, second round pick for him. But I still think that he's very valuable, and I still think he finishes as a top 10 QB every single year for the next few years. He's only 25 years old. Trust me, we've seen quarterbacks go a lot later than 25, 30 years old in the NFL.
Yeah, for sure. And I don't know if it will be Kellen Moore's offense due to the fact that they are looking for a head coach. So it could end if Jim Harbaugh or somebody like that goes there, they're going to bring their own guys. But nonetheless, it's going to be a better system for him than anything Brandon Staley has done in his time in Los Angeles. So I absolutely think it's a buy as well. If you can get him for an early second round anywhere, I absolutely love that because it does solve your quarterback of the future issues. Like you said, his wide receiving core, is back next year for all intensive purposes. Hopefully you get a healthy Mike Williams next season too, which only makes that offense even more appealing. It'll be interesting to see what happens with Austin Eckler if he's no longer in town. That's a big drop off for the quarterback position too, because Eckler did make Herbert look pretty darn good with a lot of his plays as well. But yeah, I think Herbert's definitely one. If you can go out and get him, that's definitely a trade. If he's available in your league, you should definitely be sniffing around and see what it costs, Brant.
Yeah, because he's also just throwing this out. He's probably sitting on somebody's IR, so he may be forgotten about too. So you might be able to steal him just that way.
Absolutely. All right, so I'm going to talk about a player here, Brant. So when you talk about buy low, I'm not sure that it gets much lower than this. And I think you're going to chuckle a little bit when I start talking about this player. But I was just thinking about things and dynasty buys, just somebody I'm interested in. What's a low-hanging fruit, somebody who did okay this year maybe, and I think they're just going to take off next year. How about Wan'Dale Robinson of the New York Giants, Brant? And listen, I've been on Wan'Dale Robinson for a couple of years now. I really like him out of Kentucky. For all intents and purposes, he is the best wide receiver in New York at this point. It'll be interesting to see what Jalen Hyatt does as he starts to progress too. But here's why I'm interested in Wan'Dale Robinson. So he plays a lot of time in the slot, spends a lot of time there. And he's very, very efficient in the slot. He has one of the best separation or causes one of the best separations in the league. It reminds me of like a really fresh Adam Thielen, like 5 years ago in Minnesota. This guy, the way he cuts, the way he runs his routes, it's very crisp. He's also another year removed from his ACL injury, so he's only getting healthier, building up more strength in that. And the best part is, Brant, this guy's not a number one on an NFL roster. He should not be. That's fine. I'm not trying to sell him as that. I want the New York Giants to draft a Keon Coleman, a Malik Neighbors, one of these high-end wide receivers, because guess what? That takes the focus off of, right? We kind of talked about it a little bit today with a different offense in that same division. A.J. Brown had such a bad year this year and really couldn't get anything going. But that benefited Devonta Smith so big. Devonta Smith was fantasy relevant every week. Wan'Dale Robinson in the slot, if there's a number one wide receiver, an actual threat in that offense, I think gets so much more love. This year he had 78 targets, 60 receptions, 525 yards, only one receiving touchdown, Brent. He still finishes like wide receiver 50, which again, that's not anything to write home about. I understand that, but that's a flex play in a 2 flex league. And that was with Daniel Jones, Tommy DeVito, Tyrod Taylor, the punter probably threw some passes in there at New York. Pete Carroll may have snuck in disguise and thrown a few passes. We don't know who all was throwing the ball for the New York Giants this year because it was so unworthy to watch. All right. So again, this is a guy that I think you could get fairly cheap right now. I think probably almost for free. He may get dropped to make room for incoming rookies. But this is a guy, Brent, that if he's available in my league, Daniel Jones is coming back. He's healthy. He's not going anywhere. Okay, they're tied to him in New York, unfortunately. But if they get another weapon, bolster that offensive line a little bit more, this is going to be an offense that starts to take shape. I like Brian Dable a lot. I still trust him. I still think he's going to get this offense heading in the right direction. I think Wan'Dale Robinson could end up having a Hunter Renfrow 2019-esque season next year. I'm talking 100 targets, 90 receptions, 800 yards receiving, 10 touchdowns. I don't think that'd be that crazy to see from Wan'Dale Robinson moving forward, Brant.
Sorry, I had my mic muted. I coughed a minute ago. Like you said, if they added a true wide receiver 1, then you got Jalen Hyatt stretching it out, and then you got Wan'Dale Robinson playing in the slot. He definitely could be capable of that. They are tied to Daniel Jones for the foreseeable future. So I absolutely love Wan'Dale Robinson as a buy. Yes, you were on him coming out of Kentucky. I've not been a fan of him, but I was a fan of him in college. He definitely was a great gadget guy in college. He was fun to watch. But you're right. It's wide open for target or for targets there in New York. And you could see it even open more with Barkley possibly being on the move out the door. So I absolutely love that. And that's a guy you're getting for free. You're sitting at your draft day and you're going, I don't like anybody in this round. Anybody want to give me Wan'Dale Robinson for this last round pick? And you maybe that person likes somebody else better than him. You're probably stealing him right out from underneath, the rug there, because there's probably not going to be a whole lot late in drafts. There's always one diamond, but maybe your diamond's already there. So we talk about wide receivers that could be a diamond in the rough. How about Michael Wilson of the Arizona Cardinals? He played in 13 games this year and finished as wide receiver 60. So just behind Wan'Dale Robinson. He played, Clayton Tune threw the ball to begin the year. Joshua Dobbs was throwing the ball at the beginning of the year. And then you got Kyler Murray back. He finished 3 games as a top 24 wide receiver. One of them was inside the top 12, as a matter of fact. And Marquise Hollywood Brown's a free agent this year. Michael Wilson stepped in at the end of the year and really took, I think, over 80% of snaps last year. This is just a guy. He's 23 years old. He's got 1 year in the pros. And I just think this is a guy that you could really, really buy or get for free, like you said with Wan'Dale Robinson. I'm really excited to see what he can do moving forward. He's a guy that there were certain games he was seeing 8-9 targets a game. So this is a guy that could really explode next year and come out of nowhere. Nobody would be talking about it because nobody's excited about the Arizona offense. Nobody's excited about a dwarf behind the line throwing a football. That'd be like me, except for a lot smaller. So
it'd be like nobody being excited to be behind you in a buffet line.
Right. Yeah, there you go. That's perfect. There you go. No, nobody's excited about this. It's not. It's kind of like what we talked about what the Rams were going to be like this year. We didn't think they were going to amount to anything, and then look what they did. So that offense in Arizona could be the just waiting for an explosion. We've seen it before, and Arizona's got a good little offensive team built around, and they're going to lose their number one because I don't think they're going to re-sign Brown. So I think Michael Wilson could benefit from that as well.
Yeah, and so you say nobody's excited about it. I was that guy who 2 weeks prior to Kyler returning to that offense, I was going out and picking up the guys like, Rondale Moore, Greg Dortch, pretty much everybody. And I didn't forget about him. I think he was just on taxis on a lot of the leagues I'm in. Wasn't able to get Michael Wilson anywhere. I'd love to have him moving forward because I do think there is a role for him for sure. So, and Kyler, like you said, is coming back next year. Justin Gannon's back there next year as the head coach. It should be another year of that offense improving. I don't think there's any Call of Duty supposed to release next year during football season, so that should help too, right?
And he had 5. Let me retract that. He had 5 games of six targets or more last year. So not 8, it was 6.
How many of those were after Kyler came back? Do you know?
All but 1. I'm not 100%
Okay.
sure what week he came back, but all of the rest were at the bottom of the season. He had 1
Okay.
at like week 4 or something.
Okay. So yeah, definitely some chemistry there then too. So I had to do this, Brant, and it was actually your idea for me to do this. My last Dynasty buy is probably my favorite. Again, I can't be thankful enough that Arthur Smith is gone, and a lot of you should be that way too. And especially those of you that have any interest in trading for this player. Drake London is my last Dynasty buy of this series here, Brant. Again, I don't really have a whole lot to say on this aside from Arthur Smith's gone. He should be getting drawn up targets every week next season. He's definitely a difference maker. We've seen his toughness. You and I were in person for one of his best games of his career against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers on December 10th. He just absolutely went nuts, made play after play. And this is a guy that's shown that when you put a jump ball up in the air, he's going to go up and get it. I expect the quarterback position to take a huge upgrade in Atlanta, whether that's a veteran like Kirk Cousins, somebody of that standing, or they trade up to draft a rookie quarterback. Either way, I think Drake London's going to be heavily involved next year. And here's the thing, Brant. So for all fantasy relevant purposes, the Atlanta Falcons offense took a step back this year compared to what they did last year. They scored less points per game, less explosive plays on the offense. I think Bijan Robinson's 71-yard touchdown the last week of the season was our longest touchdown of the season. So that goes to show a lot of things. What's interesting to me is in 2023, Drake London's yards per target actually went up almost a full yard per target. So he progressed from 22 to 23, had an okay rookie season. Everything got better except for one thing. And I think, again, this is what is going to keep people from being high on him is his touchdowns. This is a very consistent wide receiver. It is not a high ceiling play. This is not a guy who, if you're playing Tyreek Hill, you're going to be like, okay, but I have Drake London who might combat that, or CeeDee Lamb, or, any of the other Justin Jefferson type wide receivers at this point. But that is due to the fact that Arthur Smith didn't design that for him. Drake London is what, 6'3", I think. He wasn't getting red zone targets. He's a big bodied wide receiver. He's physical. Dude played college basketball. He has an insane vert. He got better at everything. He didn't play one game this year. He had 7 less targets this year than he did last year. If he'd have played in another game, he'd have beat that. 3 less receptions. Again, same thing. He actually had about 50 yards more receiving this year than he did last year. And then again, 2 less touchdowns, Brant. But this is a guy that, Arthur Smith's out of town. We should, for all intents and purposes, have a better quarterback than Desmond Ridder, unless Ridder happens to take tons of steps forward going into next season. Drake London should be on massive bounce back territory. And listen, I'm not trying to toot my horn. I'm not trying to toot your horn here. You and I were all over Dak Prescott bouncing back this season. Dak Prescott's in the MVP conversation, Brant. So I'm not saying we're there with Drake London. I'm just saying you and I sometimes have a knack for these things, and I think Drake London bounces back in a big way next year.
Absolutely. When they add a new quarterback to that team, I think Drake London's going to be the first dude knocking on your door. Hey, man, you want to play catch? Somebody has to develop chemistry with me. I am too good to be sitting on the sideline not watching it.
Mm-hmm.
Man, he had 2 touchdowns this year. That's definitely going up next year. Your offense is, in my mind, you guys have one of the most explosive offenses possibility out there. It's just getting the right coach and the right people in the right places. And Drake London is a guy that definitely could benefit from that. You're talking, this guy's probably a 15 to 20 point fantasy wide receiver every single week. He shouldn't be letting you down at all. Now, I'm excited to buy him. I think the quarterback's going to get an upgrade. I am praying in one keeper league I own, Drake London, and I am sitting there. I'm praying that Kirk Cousins goes there because I absolutely love what London and Cousins could be next year. But we'll get into that. I think Drake London, this is just a little keyway when we get into our season-long picks. I think Drake London's going to be a guy that I'm going to be picking on this year and making a lot of calls towards his touchdowns and his yards when it comes down to making our season-long picks this year. I absolutely love Drake London's upside. I loved him coming into the draft. I thought he was one of the best, if not the best, wide receiver in his class. And I'm excited to see what your team's going to do moving forward.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be one of the more fun off seasons in recent memory, just because, you know, this is a better quarterback class than we've had in recent memory. There's tons of wideouts in this class. We have the best running back free agency class we've probably ever seen with the names we talked about on last week's show. Tons of good coaching vacancies here. It's going to be a really fun offseason, Brant, and we just scratched the surface today with Dynasty buys. Like I said, next week we're coming back with Dynasty sells. It's going to be a fun offseason.
So one thing that just came across my ticker, I must have missed it when flipping through after work. The Bears fired their OC, but keeping the head coach. Did you see that? What do you make of that?
He's gone.
Do you think Fields is gone? I want to talk about that. That's one of the biggest topics because they do have the 1-0 win. What is your take on Fields? And I'm going to give you mine here.
So here's what, if I'm being honest, Brant, if they get a decent enough return for Fields, I think they'll move him and take. Fields has had 4 years to show something, and he's really not shown a whole lot. So I do think they'll bow out on Fields. They'll trade him. 3 full seasons of Fields, excuse me, not 4. I think they trade him. If I'm being honest, if they get a decent enough package for him. If not, maybe they try to run it with him one more year, because that first round draft pick, the one overall, we saw Carolina come in last year and give up a bunch of picks, a stud player in DJ Moore, who I've been wrong on a couple of times this year. But Carolina way overpaid for that pick. So the Bears and Ryan Poles especially may be salivating to do that again. I don't know how much they're going to get for this one this year, because I don't see a team as dumb as the Carolina Panthers overpaying. The 101 is definitely worth a lot. Definitely this year with Caleb Williams. I just don't know if a bad president was set, and maybe Ryan Poles is a little spoiled at this point. So I think Fields is traded if they can get the right package for him, Brant. But we'll see.
So I think Fields stays, and here's why I don't think they get the right package, because, like you said, you got 3 full years. So I'd have to go back and look at the contract, but I believe he would be entering his last year in his contract unless they pick up the 5th year. So the team is going to have to pay this man money if they're trading. So not only are you trading your future away in draft picks, but you're also putting a whole bunch of money into a question mark quarterback. So I don't think they get the right package. I think Fields stays. I do think they trade out of the first pick. I don't think they get what they want out of either. They trade Fields, I don't think they're going to get the right package. If they trade the 101, I don't think they're going to get the greatest package that they want. I do see them moving back. I think Marvin Harrison is added to that team, but I think they're running it back with Justin Fields, because I don't think they're going to want to move on for what they're going to get for him.
Okay, there you have it. So, again, I think that kind of does it for us this week, Brant. Obviously, we'll be back next week with Dynasty Sells. We'll see if I can upset a whole bunch of people with my take next week, like I did with my Dynasty sell of DJ Moore, which I admit I was wrong on. We'll see how spicy we get next week, Brant.
Absolutely. But as always, stay hungry.
Stay fat, my friends.